Hello there, and welcome to Weathering Tough Seasons, a stress management for farm couples workshop through the Farm Family Resource Initiative with Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. I am Adrienne DeSutter. I am your friendly neighborhood agricultural mental health consultant or specialist, or the person who likes to talk about the tough stuff. And so today we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that goes into being married to a farmer or being a farmer yourself. And how those dynamics impact our relationships, and what type of tough seasons we go through as farm couples. This is just a little picture of my husband and I and our youngest son here, which I imagine is a little bit familiar for some of you. You're either hopping in, together, whether that's working together in your equipment on your farms and your fields, whether that's one of you taking care of things at home while the other one is out doing some of the dirty work. But either way, I am here to share with you just a few tips and pointers on managing stress for farm couples. And notice that I didn't say eliminating stress. I'm not here to tell you that my husband and I and my family and I have it all figured out when it comes to stress, because we don't, and no one does. And that's kind of the biggest piece of advice I'll share right off from the start, is that the sooner you can figure out that nobody's got it figured out, you're one step closer to having the stress stuff figured out. The whole idea is we need to learn how to manage our stress, not get rid of it. We need to learn how we can minimize or how we can get through those tough seasons, because we know, with whether it's heavy fall, heavy spring seasons, or just the winter right now of refiguring out how to make our home routines work, being together in the house a lot, or being together on the farm a lot. If you and your spouse are on physically doing the work together on the farm, there's a lot that goes into it. So I'm just here to share with you a culmination of some professional suggestions, I suppose, that come from my background in mental health. I was a school counselor. I have a master's degree in counseling, and have married a farmer. I didn't grow up on a farm, but I have about 10 years experience now being the spouse of a farmer. And let me tell you, when you're not from an agricultural background and you hop into this world, you recognize real quick that it's a unique one. So I'm here to share with you some of those things, some of our lived experience. And for the past few years, I've been working with farm families, farm organizations across the country, actually. And so I'll share a little bit of their stories with you as well. These are some of the things that bring us stress in a unique way. We know it's no surprise that farmers work long hours, right? Which means either both of you are working long hours, because I know in our home, my husband's out on the farm and he sometimes is there all day, morning, noon, and night, which means I'm working long hours at home with our kids and at my job and trying to manage things. Or you're both on the farm, taking care of chores and taking and running equipment and whatever it is that you whatever setup you all have within your relationship. It's long hours no matter what. It doesn't matter if it's a busy season or not. We're putting in the hours. And other families kind of get to say, okay, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, checking out of our job, coming home and doing the home stuff, and we don't always have that. So we're either always together, working together, or it sometimes feel like we're always apart. Again, during those super, super busy seasons when I feel like sometimes I don't know where my spouse is, what he's doing, when he's going to be home. And some of you probably share that as well. And along with that comes this idea of a work and home imbalance. We again know that some people get to clock out, check out, and owning a farm and running a farm is not exactly the same, right? We don't necessarily have a set schedule. A lot of our decisions that we make for the farm impact our home life more than they would if I was working in an office job or some other type of career. Financially, for example, I know for us, when we decided, hey, we're going to start buying cows, we're going to be livestock farmers now, that also meant financially for a while there that we weren't going to be working on our home and renovating our home, because that money was going to be set for the farm. So financially, we see a lot of implications on how decision making for the farm impacts our decision making at home as well. And not just financially, but also just the priorities, the way that we spend our time. I know, again, when we decided we were going to buy livestock, that meant that there was going to be a lot of time devoted to chores based on livestock, which meant that time was going to be taken away from other things we were doing, whether that was at home, whether it was with our children, whatever. So, we have to recognize that just because we are farm families and farm couples, that doesn't mean that those long working hours give us an excuse to remove ourselves as a spouse, or as a parent, or as a grandparent, or a family member. We still have those roles. And so it's kind of tough to balance all of that. And again, it makes decision-making very tricky, I think, on the farm. Again, who gets a say in what? For me, I'm not running the equipment on our farm. I'm not out there literally doing dirty work. I'm doing the books, running our home, things like that. So do I get a say in when we're making major purchases, or when the farm is making major purchases, especially because we have a multi-family, several different families working in DeSutter farms. They're all DeSutters, but when does my opinion matter? It's a good question, and it causes some stress sometimes, and just some questions sometimes. Can you imagine for a second if you were working if you were a doctor, for example, or a hairstylist, let's say, okay, and your spouse, felt like they needed to or wanted to weigh in on the things that you were doing in your career? It would be really uncalled for. But because of the nature of farming and the family lifestyle it is, and again, the way that those decisions on the farm impact your family so directly, it makes it a little bit tough to make decisions and to work together, especially when we don't see eye to eye on all the decisions that are being made for the farm. Maybe you are at a point where you're retired, right? You just joined the retired life. Well, the farm doesn't. No farmer retires, really, right? There's still stuff going on. This isn't a lifestyle that slows down too much. It certainly can, and it certainly, there are ways to make that happen. But sometimes it can feel like that as one of the members of your family that, maybe you're ready to start settling down, handing things off to children or to other people, handing those responsibilities down, and your spouse doesn't agree, doesn't see eye to eye on that. So that can be tough. Those conversations are tough, and those decisions are tough. We have a limited schedule. We know that goes without saying, right? At our house, it is, planting season, which goes straight into baling season or calving season. And then we have harvest. And then we have this nice little winter of cold ickiness that we call conference season at our house, because we're going to meetings and annual meetings and conferences left and right. We've got multiple conferences that we go to each month over the winter season. So it's not like we really have a whole lot of time. I remember my husband and I, when we were choosing our wedding date, we sat down and we were like, where are we going to fit this in? It's kind of a big day, but we want to be able to enjoy it. But where are we going to stick this? Because our schedule is a little bit rigid here. Luckily, we opted for the end of November. We crossed fingers we'd have good weather that season, and we did. So you just never know how things are going to line up when it comes to your scheduling. And that also means there's limited time for resting. There's limited downtime, not just because we have so many responsibilities, but even if say on a rain day, you say, okay, well, that's supposed to be your rest day. You get a rain day. Well, number one, You probably have other stuff that you have to catch up on, either at home or in your office, right? Or maybe you just aren't in the mood to rest that day. It's hard to just rest when someone says, this is your day to rest. Yeah. And that comes in seasons or days. It's hard to say, okay, winter is time to rest. Well, maybe that's not a period for you where you feel restful. A lot of people get kind of the winter blues when weather is tough, and we want to be resting at times where it's nice out. I know in our house anyway, we want to be able to enjoy those nice days, and it's hard to do that. Hard to sit and watch a football game in the fall when you've got harvest going on. So it's tough. It's an interesting dynamic that, again, farm couples see that we don't see in other occupations necessarily. And speaking of that, we do have an isolated lifestyle, which again, we can be very grateful for, and we really appreciate sometimes. We like being out in the country. In my home, I really enjoy this lifestyle. That said, that limited schedule makes it tough for us to be able to say yes to different events that our friends are throwing, or it makes it hard for us to grow relationships with other couples, with other families, because we've got to say no a lot, or one of us has to fly solo a lot. And it's a unique aspect of the way farming works. So we've got all these things going on that, again, we can be really grateful for. We can soak up and appreciate, but we can also acknowledge that sometimes this causes some conflict within our relationships. So what do we do about it? Well, I've got some good feelings at home, some stress management. Again, we're not taking away the stress, but how can we approach stress in a little bit of a different way? And the first one is my favorite. I've said this for years. Teamwork makes the dream work. I did not make that up, but it is a mantra that I have used for a long time now. And I think it really applies to what we can be doing as farm couples. The thing is, you are a team, whether you like it or not. Doesn't matter what stage of your relationship you're in. Maybe you're new to agriculture. Maybe you have been in agriculture for generations. Maybe you are someone who has just settled down with someone early in the farming years. Maybe you have been married for decades. It doesn't matter where you're at in your phase of your relationship. Teamwork is something that you have, whether you like it or not. And so we have to work on that together. We have to make our goals together. We have to make sure that we sit down at some point, and it doesn't have to be with a pencil and a paper and sitting down with a mediator and making a big production of setting goals, although those are all wonderful things to do. But we need to make sure that we're aligning our worldview, right? Our long-term goals, make sure that those are the same. If we're not setting goals together, then of course we're going to have frustration. Of course, we're going to have surprises that happen in our decision making that are going to be frustrating and cause some conflict. When you can align your worldview, and I'm not saying you need to agree on every single goal. My husband and I have very different short-term goals sometimes, and very different long-term goals sometimes too, to be quite frank. But overall, if we can sit down and just discuss, this is what I think is important. This is what you think is important. How can we create a goal that combines what we both think are important? So maybe that means long-term, we're talking about how many acres or how much land we want to farm or rent or own or whatever. Maybe it's that we want to get into livestock farming, or we want to have a certain number, whatever it is, long-term. How can you set a goal where you can compromise together and align that view? Because then again, those everyday decisions are going to become less frustrating. They're less of a surprise. If I will be quite frank, that when we decided we were going to be livestock farmers, that was really much more my husband's decision. And it kind of went like this. It was a phone call that said, "Hey, Adrienne, how do you feel about owning cows?" And I said, I guess I trust your judgment, Drew. If you want to have cows, let's get cows. That's fine. And he said, good, because they're being delivered later today. So that wasn't really a goal of ours that we had discussed first. It wasn't the best way for us to get into that that avenue, and of course, it could have caused a lot of frustration with us. And at first, it didn't, but it did at some point, because I was going, okay, now my husband is leaving earlier in the mornings or at other points in the day to go feed cattle at the farm. We live a little bit of a ways away, which meant that removed him from helping me with whatever it was that was going on at home. And that's okay to a point, but we had to be on the same page about it. We needed to set that goal together, because otherwise what happened was I started getting frustrated with him, or it was a surprise when he decided in the middle of the day, hey, I'm going to go feed cows, when I had other plans. So if we weren't communicating those things, if those goals weren't set together, that is where we saw some frustration. When we sat down finally and talked about that this is something he wanted to do, because even though it was more work, it was really enjoyable work for him. It made me have a better understanding where he came from. And so that was okay then for us, to have that decision that cows were going to be a part of our farm, and know that, if as long as I could communicate, hey, at this time I need you here, or, if you wouldn't mind letting me know ahead of time when you're going to go feed cattle, then that works out. Okay. So when we can set those goals together, the surprises just become less frustrating. And not only that, we need to make sure that when we're setting goals, we're talking about long-term goals and short-term goals. And you've probably all been trained in goals at some point in your life where the goals should be concrete, right? They should be measurable. But I want to say that that's true, but they also need to be flexible. It's okay for you to say, I'd like to have 1,000 cows, if that's a goal that you want to make. But if you decide in a year or two, you sit down with each other and you decide that's not reasonable anymore, or it's not something that's important to you anymore, just know that that's okay. Adjusting those goals together is important too. The second part of teamwork is something that I will credit to my mother-in-law, because she reminds me of this all the time, that not only are we going to set our goals together and work together, right? We're also going to stress together. You are a team, as I said, like it or not. And one thing that happens when we are in the midst of conflict is that we sort of start to compare our stresses. I know in my home, I catch myself sometimes when my husband says, oh, I'm tired. In my mind, I'm going, you have no idea what it's like to be tired, right? Or he does the same thing, where if I complain about, how something was physically aching to me, or I'm uncomfortable or whatever. And in his mind, he's going, yeah, do you know what I did today? And so what happens is we start almost competing for who is more stressed or who has it worse. And we do this at all stages of life. It doesn't matter if you've been together for decades or not, that sometimes, we express a feeling, and instead of just being heard, we start to compete, or we say, yeah, well, think about how it is for me. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can change those conversations to be a little bit more empathetic. But I think the biggest, the most practical, I guess, tip I have is instead of competing, remember, like my mother-in-law says, worry together, stress together. A lot of times we have we express those moments of, yeah, well, you don't know what it's like to be me, because we just want to feel understood. We just want someone to understand where we're coming from. And so instead of using that opportunity to compete, acknowledge that, yeah, we are all struggling sometimes. We're both struggling in our relationship, in our daily tasks, whatever it is. And it's okay to lean toward each other in those moments rather than trying to compete for, who has it worse. It's okay. I think one of the most practical tips is to replace the word but with the word and. So husband comes home, right? And he says, I really had a tough day today. And in my mind, I sometimes go to, yeah, sorry you had a tough day, but man, you should have seen mine. Let's switch that. Instead of saying but and adding some type of caveat, man, you really had a tough day. I mean, and I did too. Just saying and instead of but sometimes allows both people to both things to be true, essentially. And then you can use that in all sorts of different different ways when you're communicating with people. Just realizing that the but minimizes what a person has said and allows them to have that. And then you can also express what you want to say too. And I'm going to take it a step further and say sometimes it's better to just not do any of it. Yeah, you did have a tough day today. Then you're done. Okay. Allow a person to have that. Even if in your mind you're saying, I had a tough day too, maybe right now isn't the time for you to share that. Maybe it's just time for you to acknowledge that another person can have that feeling. If later you want to bring your tough day up too, because you need to vent too, that's okay. But it's okay also to just allow the other person to have their moment. I know that's something I need to work on, but it's a really practical way to allow a person to have those feelings. So mantra number 2, after teamwork makes the dream work, we're going to remember that we need to vacation every day. We have talked about the limitations of our schedules, right? And we've talked about the limitations of, even just being able to celebrate things. So I know, Mother's Day, for example, always falls in May. And I have a hard time with that because that means that there's probably planting that's going to be going on. And I'm probably not going to get celebrated, darn it. And so sometimes I have a hard time with that. The thing is, we don't have to do things the way that every other family does them. We are unique in the things that we can't do, but we're also unique in the things that we can do. Okay. So that means we can celebrate anything. We can celebrate anytime. We don't have to wait, just for Mother's Day and make sure that that's our day. We can celebrate, any of our downtimes. We can celebrate a rain day. We can celebrate, a calf being born. We can celebrate tax paperwork being done, right? I'm certainly going to be doing that soon. And that is something that we're allowed to do, making sure that we're not just focusing on our checklist and getting everything done, but also acknowledging when something is done, we get to take a moment to appreciate that something is done. I know, for example, one Easter, I had 2 kids at the time, and I was kind of bummed out that my husband wasn't going to be at our family events for Easter. And so something that we did is I took the girls out to the tractor, and we just had a tractor ride. And we took a couple pictures, and the girls and I were all dressed up, and my husband was definitely not. He was covered in dirt. And so the pictures, though, were perfect. That they really described kind of the way our life was at the time. And it was an enjoyable moment for us. So we can celebrate, we can take those little vacations, we can make happy moments like a vacation every single day. We just have to be a little bit creative about how we do that. I know that my husband and I, we went through a period of time, we had just gotten cows taken over to our home. There was a fence problem. Every stinking day, I tell you what, there were cows out every week for a month at least. And we were starting to get more and more bummed and more stressed every single time I would pick up the phone, and he would pick up the phone, and he would know exactly why I was calling. It's because the cows were out, and it would just bring his day down. And I was like, I'm sorry, man. I wish I could call you with good news, but I don't have it today. And then it dawned on me, I could call with good news, because there is good news that happens every day, And so instead of always calling him when the cows were out, I would send him a text message, hey, no cows out today, woohoo. And it would just bring us a laugh. Obviously, it wasn't any big giant celebration, but having that something to smile about sometimes, those are the moments that allow us to kind of fill our cup when the stressful moments are pulling or emptying it, So find something to celebrate in every day. Now, date nights, I'm sure you've heard that before. Make sure that you are taking time for each other, just the two of you. Prioritize that. And I agree, but I'm here to tell you that I know, again, at our house, we don't take date nights the same way as other people. We can't find babysitters for our multiple children that are young all the time. And so we don't always have a way to make date night. So what we do is we make a date at home. And that means that when we get the kids in bed, we just lay around together. And it doesn't have to be any big, great conversation. It doesn't have to be anything exciting happening other than watching TV sometimes. It's just sometimes being able to have that moment for us every day with each other, physically next to each other. And so for us, that's when that time is, but everyone has a different time. Maybe you're the type of family or the type of couple who make sure that you're delivering meals every day or having meals together every day, even during, in the combines and the tractors and the semis, whatever. That's great. Whatever it is for you that allows you to have time with your spouse, even if it's just a few minutes a day, that is time, the two of you, where you're not necessarily having a conversation about farming, is really, really important for your mental health, I think, and just for each other. So, have those nights, make sure you're celebrating anything, get creative, think about what you can do, not just about what you can't do. Think about how you can vacation, right? Can you, when it's a birthday, can you make sure that you guys have your favorite meal, order takeout, even if it's during a busy season, and make sure that you're having good conversation at some point. It doesn't have to be every day, but make sure that you are creating opportunities to have conversations. I will tell you, just this last week, I was having a conversation with my husband about this, this exact presentation. I was like, okay, Drew, what suggestions do you have? What helps you when we're in the midst of conflict? And we had some really great laughs and some really good conversation just by taking 10 minutes to talk about a presentation. So how can you do that? How can you fit that into your day? The last mantra that I'm going to end with today is communicating with love. We always love our spouses. We don't always like them, but we always love them, right? And so there are 4 suggestions here, 4 little tips for better communication during stressful times and beyond. We want to listen, observe, validate, and empathize. Listening is so, so, so important. We, a lot of times when we're in the midst of stress, want to talk. We want to vent our own problem, or we want to make sure we're sharing our own perspective on something, or we're maybe even just trying to solve our spouse's problem. And so we talk and we want to give advice, and we fill that space with our own conversation. And sometimes all we need to do is listen, right? My husband, one harvest season, he called me, and they had one more pass to go with to get the last field done that they were working on for that day. And the rain came and it was muddy, and he called me and he's cursing the weatherman, and he was so frustrated. And of course I'm trying to think of something to say. And so, he finally gets home and he walks in the door and he's so angry. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm surprised you guys didn't watch the weather, or like, obviously he was watching the weather, but in my mind, I was just trying to fill this, maybe next time you should do something different. And that didn't go over so well in my house, let me just tell you. And he said, you know what, sometimes I just need you to listen to my issue. And it clicked. And I'm like, here I am, a counselor, not listening to my own spouse, right? Not knowing that he didn't need advice. He didn't need a problem solved. He just needed to be able to vent. And that's what we need to do sometimes, just listen. When we do that, it allows the other person to figure things out sometimes, and kind of figure out what the deeper problem is. He was frustrated. He was tired, right? It's not just about getting the field done. It's about being able to get home and have a break and get some rest and whatever. And so listening is something that we really need to practice. So the next planting season, my husband called me. And so again, this is, 6 months later or whatever. And he's again thinking this time that they were going to get a rain day. They didn't get the rain day. And he's so angry, cursing the weatherman again. And I learned my lesson. And instead of saying anything, I just listened and I said, Drew, you sound really stressed out. I'm really sorry to hear that. I wanted you home too. I wanted you to get a break too. I'm sorry. And just by listening and just by hearing and just by validating and showing the empathy to him, that was all he needed. You know what he did? He cracked a joke and he said, all right, well, I'll see you later. And that was the end of it. And his spirits were up by the end of that 3-minute conversation, just by me not giving advice, just by me taking a step back and listening, and validating and empathizing, which I'll talk about here in just a second. So sometimes that's what we need to do. And a lot of times, again, we want to tell a person what to do, give them advice. And sometimes if we just allow them to talk through and we're listening to what they're saying, then allowing them to talk through is all they need. It's all they need to do to figure it out themselves. Our O stands for observe. And I don't know if you've ever heard about the 5 love languages. I don't know all the love languages. I'm not super into the love languages. Okay. But this conversation is sort of about love languages. Knowing, observing, paying attention to what makes the other person happy, what helps the other person. For me, I think Drew sometimes thought if he bought me flowers or, if he did something kind, that would be helpful to me. And I do love those things. But what I really love is a man who does the dishes. Okay. And so one day we paid attention to each other, and we decided that by paying attention to each other and really figuring out what makes the other person happy, that would allow us to do those things more. Instead of me guessing what was going to be making him happy, that's what I wanted. And so when he figured that out, he started coming home and doing some things like that, like doing dishes or helping wash floors or helping with the kids. That was my love language, and he was speaking to it for sure. And so by doing that, again, releases some stress for me, allows us to get along a little bit better. So pay attention to what it is that makes the other person happy, right? Validating and empathizing. What we're talking about here is just acknowledging, that you understand what a person's going through, or that if you don't understand what a person's going through, you can at least say, I hear you. And I'm sorry you're going through that, or I can see that this is difficult for you, or whatever it is. We're just showing a person that we have empathy, right? We may not be walking through their shoes, but we can see that what they're going through is tough. And so we're going to talk about that, and we're going to see that. We're going to tell them that we see that. The neat thing here is that you don't even have to agree. You don't have to agree with that, with what perspective they have. But what we're just doing is understanding. On that weather story, when my husband called and he was, frustrated about not getting that rain day, I don't have to agree with him, but it's not the time to argue that or share that. All I have to do is say, I can see that you're struggling with this. And by saying that and saying, I'm sorry that this is difficult for you, that allowed him to feel heard, feel seen, and that solved the problem in itself, right? Sometimes we don't have to be problem solvers, but the problems solve themselves when we can communicate with love. Finally, I want to just mention to you, make sure I got it. I want to mention to you that seasons come and seasons go, right? There are seasons of our life, whether it is long seasons, like having children, like entering the stages of retirement, right? Like, starting new jobs, right? There are all sorts of seasons that we have in our life. And I think what's really important is that we can recognize that sometimes we're going to just go through tough phases together, and that's okay. Maybe you're pregnant like this one is. And my husband knows that during this time, this is a tough season for us. Having young children is a tough season for us. And we know that we're going to be a little bit different, to be a little more on edge, and that's okay. And so what we have to just acknowledge is that it's going to get better. That's the key to having long marriages. I think I've only had a 7-year marriage, so don't quote me on this, but I think the key for what the research tells us is that just acknowledging that it's okay to have stressful times, and acknowledging that those are phases, and that we remain hopeful and faithful that we will get through those phases, and we can think about what it is for us that works. Think about the last time you've had a tough phase. How did you get out of it? Was it that you talked it out a lot? Did you need to have a lot of discussions? Did it help you to bring laughter to your marriage or your relationship? Was it that you needed time together, or was it that you needed time apart for a little while in the evenings or whenever? Did you have to think about things differently? Whatever it is, whatever it was for you last time that helped you move forward, really use that to help yourself move forward in every phase and in every season. And of course, there are exceptions to this, that sometimes we can't do it on our own. There are, counselors there for a reason. You don't have to have a mental health condition to see a counselor. And even if your spouse doesn't want to talk through something with a counselor, even just one of you going can be helpful. So hopefully this has helped you, give you some ideas about how we can, as farm couples, manage through some of that stress that we have that's going to be inevitable, but that ultimately, when we farm together and we work together, we can do life together as well.